Right, so now all the craziness is over. Let's talk about Rolex. Hi everyone and welcome to Shaluso, and yes, today we are talking about the new releases from Rolex for 2020. This year there's been so much hype going around new Rolex models, both at the beginning of the year, pre-corona, when everyone thought that Rolex was releasing new models at Baselworld, as they always do. I remember there were prediction videos coming out as early as January, and now with the new release in September, the same sort of cycle repeated. So needless to say, now all the craziness is over. Now we actually know what Rolex was going to do with this year. Now I know most of you want to hear about the new Submariner. There's actually a link to that in the description below if you want to jump ahead. But I'm going to start with what I think is actually the most significant change, and that is the Oyster Perpetual, specifically the Oyster Perpetual 41. First off, with the name right there, you see that they've upgraded it to a 41mm case size instead of 39. But more importantly, on the inside, they have upgraded the Oyster Perpetual to have the 3230 movement. So that's 70-hour power reserve, Parachrom hairspring, chronology escapement. They've brought it right up to date, and that makes it a lot more competitive. You need to remember that this is their entry-level model. Another big change they made is they added the Easy Link, which was something that was missing on the previous generation. So what they've done essentially is they've made it a lot more competitive within the Rolex range. Most people tend to think of, your first Rolex or your starting Rolex is the Submariner. But given the insane demand that they always have, the fact that flippers and dealers keep buying them up to resell them, it's very difficult for someone to start their Rolex journey or start collecting in general and start with a Rolex if they want to get a Submariner. So I think what Rolex has done with this is they've actually made the Oyster Perpetual much more appealing, much more competitive, and much better value overall. At $5,900, you're getting a lot of watch for your money. And another little change is you now have double batons at the 9 and the 3. Previously, those were single. So that's a little bit more gold you're getting as well for your money. So again, all those little changes, remember Rolex is always about the little details. They've added so much more value. But let's face it, the biggest change that everyone notices is those new dials. They launched a bunch of new colors that are all very evocative of the Stella dials of the 70s that went on the Datejusts, as well as the early 2000s Daytona Beach collection. Very, very vibrant, exciting. And the interesting thing is they added these on the 41 as well as on the 36. In general, if you look at things like the Datejust and the Day-Date, normally the fun dials, they tend to keep them on the 36 variants, but in this case it's available on both, and I hope that's a change that's going to happen in the future across the entire size spectrum as opposed to just the 36. The next thing they changed is they introduced the Oysterflex on the Skydweller. Now this is something I didn't see coming at all, but it does make a lot of sense. I made a video a month or two ago about the fact that the Skydweller is probably the best modern Rolex in my opinion, and a lot of that is down to its versatility. By adding the Oysterflex to it, that just adds another layer of versatility. It means you can use it as a more casual watch. It means you don't have to lug around a ton of metal. Like all Oysterflex models, it is only available on the gold variant. So that means from a comfort standpoint, you're actually saving all of that weight from the gold and having the Oysterflex bracelet. You save about $8,000 relative to the equivalent bracelet model. But probably the biggest takeaway from this is the fact that they've also included the glide lock again on the Oysterflex. When I did my video about the Yachtmaster 42, I pointed out that that had the glide lock on it. So this means Rolex is able to offer fewer sizes for the Oysterflex because of that added variability on the clasp. Prior to that, when they just had the Easy Link, Rolex offered 6 different size variants for the Oysterflex, and you really had to pick the right one. Otherwise, you'd have to shell out money to get a new one, to get it sized properly. What this means for us as buyers is it means there's a lot more safety on the pre-owned market in terms of making sure you have the right size because you can adjust it a lot more. What it means for Rolex as a company is they can standardize more of their production. They don't have to make so many variants. It means they can cut their costs and produce more, which is something that we're going to see as a recurring theme in some of the other models as well. And let's talk about the Submariner. Of course, this is the one that everyone was waiting for. In my initial predictions video back in March, I talked about how it was pretty obvious they were going to update the Submariner. I predicted they were going to have a blue variant. I thought it was going to be in steel, but they've just made another one in white gold. Interestingly though, I was reinforced in my belief that blue would still play a role in this new model because of what we saw with Tudor. This is now the second year in which Tudor has released a model very similar in terms of colorway to that of its equivalent Rolex model. Remember back in 2018, we got the Black Bay GMT in Pepsi colors at the same time that we got the Rolex GMT Master 2 in Pepsi colors. So I think that's something to watch when making future predictions and speculations. Keep an eye on Tudor. But one of my other predictions was that they were gonna broaden the bracelet in an effort to make the lugs a bit more proportional, and they did. They've now increased the bracelet aperture to 21 millimeters is what I'm reading. Rolex doesn't actually publish the measurement for their lug width, so I'm going off of what I see in other publications. What that has done is it means that they've been able to slim down the lugs, but they've slimmed them down from the inside instead of cutting them out from the outside, if that makes sense. And also the diameter of the watch itself has gone up to 41 millimeters. It's a small change. Some people are thinking this is going to be the end of the world, but I think it's more an effort by Rolex to just improve the overall proportions. I think proportionately this looks better than its predecessor. I was never a big fan of the Super Case, but I don't think, for example, that people with smaller wrists are going to be blocked out of this versus a Super Case Submariner. I think if you can wear the previous gen, you can wear this one. It won't look too oversized. I think they've just improved the proportions. But another interesting thing, if you look at this lineup, is that all of them, except for the gold variants, have black dials. Previously, the Hulk had a sunray dial, the Smurf had a blue lacquer dial. In this case, they're all black dials with the exception of the blue sunray on the gold variants. But this is notable because what it means is that Rolex is now shorting you the extra work to make a nicer and more elaborate dial. Across the entire range, say for those gold variants, you have just the same black lacquer dial, which is the same dial that they put onto the GMT Masters and the same dial they put onto the Yacht Masters. It's very, very standardized, and I think that leads me to the big inference I want to take away from this model, which is that I think that production is going to be stronger. If you look at the last few years, they've been transitioning out of the 3135 movement into the 3235. That's coincided with seemingly lesser supply of some of these Submariner models. Now they're able to ramp that up to meet that demand because they can scale. If they're making all the same dials, all the same movements, it means they can produce more in less time because Rolex is still a mass manufacturer. They make around 1 million watches a year. And if you look at some of the moves they've been making, a lot of it has opened up opportunities for them to make more watches and to make them faster. So keep an eye out for that and don't get caught in the hype that any of these watches are rare. These are mass-produced watches, and bear that in mind when you're making the decision on whether you want to pay more just to skip the waiting list. And then we do have to talk about pricing. I haven't even bothered committing the new retail price to memory, purely because it's largely going to be irrelevant, but you'll find it on the infographic. But more importantly, when we talk about pricing, bear in mind there's going to be a lot of hype because these models are new. Last year when we saw the new Batman, or the Batgirl as some people call it, we saw spikes both in its predecessor and a huge jump in the gray market price as well. The original Batman on the Oyster bracelet jumped up to a high of about 17,000 US, and now it has normalized to an average of about 15,000 US. In the case of the new model that came out, it had a lot of initial hype when it first came out, hitting highs above 20,000 US, and now it's normalized down to an average of about 17,000. So bear in mind that these will have a lot of initial hype, both the new models and their predecessor versions, because of the discontinuation, but they will normalize. So if you're thinking of paying a mad premium now, maybe just wait a little bit. But overall, I think that this was still somewhat an underwhelming release, but that's Rolex. I think it's always a little bit of a balance between the fact that we're always expecting them to do more of the same, but in our minds we hope they do something different, and then something comes out and then we start looking for revolutionary change in what is evolutionary change. Rolex has done a great job essentially in managing our expectations to still make a big deal out of small changes, but at the same time people are still kind of disappointed, but they're still excited. It's a weird world when it comes to Rolex. In my view though, I'm still the most excited about the Oyster Perpetual. I love the new selection of dials, especially the light blue. It is very Miami Vice, but also it reminds me of the blue that they put on their platinum models, and I am always a sucker for things from the 80s and 90s, so maybe I'm a little bit biased. But I think there's a lot we can take away from these releases in terms of making future predictions. Clearly, they're going to move towards more standardization. Clearly, they're trying to differentiate and really segment their models. Now they have a nice little progression of 40mm GMT, 41mm sub, and then 42mm Explorer, and then 43mm in the Sea Dweller. So they have a nice little progression in sizing. Similar thing in metals. Now with the GMT, you can only get it in white gold, still on a Jubilee, or rose gold two-tone or rose gold full. Submariner, you can't get any rose gold models. It's only white gold, still on an Oyster, or two-tone yellow gold, full yellow gold. This sort of differentiation is something I think we can expect in future when we make other predictions. It'll be interesting to see how that factors into other models as well. And also from a prediction standpoint, it is surprising that the Air King hasn't been cancelled yet. My guess is they're going to keep it and update it. Maybe that's where they'll have a bit more exciting change. But in the next few years, I imagine we're going to see updates to the Air King, the Milgauss, and the Explorer because they are really the outliers still using the old movements. I think as time passes, we'll figure out which of those is coming sooner, but I'd keep an eye on those as well. And then the last thing to bear in mind is that we really have exited the era in which Rolex releases new models on just precious metal and then releases the steel models a bit later. I think they've recognized the demand for their models such to the point that as long as they don't change them too much, they can just release a whole collection right away. And that's exactly what they've done. If you remember the rollout for the previous gen, that was gold first in 2008 with the white gold Smurf, and then 2010, the rest of the collection. GMT Master 2, same deal in 2005, yellow gold first, and then they had the steel variants later. So without a doubt, anytime we're looking at a new model or a new collection, we need to bear in mind that steel is probably going to be coming right away, which means lots of hype. But in any case, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these new releases? Which one is your favorite? Which one would you get? What were you excited about? What were you disappointed with? I'd love to know your comments. And even though I'm not the biggest Rolex fanboy, I can't wait to get my hands on some of these, to see them in the metal, to see how those colors reflect both on the bezels of the new Submariners and especially the dials on the new Oyster Perpetuals. And also, if you like this video, make sure you like it and share it. If you want to see more pictures of watches or the infographics that I use, make sure you follow me on Instagram at Shaluso. If you want to keep seeing new watch videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you know when the next video comes out. And of course, thanks for watching this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.